So this will serve as our continuation for the discussion which is in environmental science. So I've already discussed our first lesson which is for introduction to ecology. So today, let's continue our discussion by discussing the next lesson which is lesson 2, the principles of ecology. Of course, as we all know that ecology has its own disciplinary, has its own branches and subdivision. And today, let's continue to discuss or on how we can understand more about ecology. Okay, let's start now on, of course, first and foremost, understand the world, or how can we understand the world, or the understanding our world. Okay, what affects the environment also affects you. So literally, by understanding the world, or by understanding the environment of a certain place, the environment itself, if the environment itself affects, or there is something happens or bad or problem in a certain environment, it will affects you as an organism or as a human inside the environment. Not only you, but also all of the living organism or non-living organism that is in the area or in the environment will give, or the affection between the problem of a certain area ay maapektuhan din sila. Okay, this statement is very correct. So what affects the environment also affects the human or the living organism in the area. So understanding what affects the environment is important because it is where you live. So by that, all of the problems or situation pertaining to your area or pertaining with the area, you must be understand, you must have to learn something or understand something about your environment. You need to know the culture of the environment for you to assess, or for you to know how can you lessen the problem or the effects of a certain problem of your environment. So sa pamamagitan ng pag-alam mo kung what's the problem, what would be the causes of this, malalaman mo or maiiwasan mo ang ganung sitwasyon in the environment. That's why it's called understanding the world, or understanding your area, or understanding the environment. So, in principles of ecology, we will understand more about our environment. We will be understand more about the ecology. So, by understanding that, we will, of course, tackle about some history pertaining to ecology. Not only history, but also with the persons behind the field of ecology. Let's proceed. So, aside from that, one aspect on identifying or understanding the effects of the world is, or the effects of the environment, is ecological research. By using or by making a certain research, you can eventually test, or you can eventually understand what is happening to a certain area. So that this job is actually most used by ecologists. So ecologists are those person that studied ecology. So as we all know that one. So most ecologists used to call it not ecological research but scientific research. So for ecologists, ecological research is also called as scientific research, or if in the field of science, it's called as scientific method. If scientific method has its own step, scientific research has also its own step pertaining to ecology. So it actually includes using descriptive and quantitative methods. When we say quantitative methods, we all know that one. We are pertaining on the number. Okay, the number of a certain participants, of a certain participants of yours in a certain ecological research. So that would be done if you will make a certain scientific research pertaining to ecology. They obtain this descriptive or information, because as we all know, descriptive methods are behind those information or your observation about the organism, not only in the organism but also in the environment. So kaya nga sinabi ko that in ecological research, there are some steps. So this day, aside from you will be knowing the principles or the starting of the principles of ecology, kasi this will be the first thing. In knowing the principle of ecology, ecological research is involved. So with that, let's know what are those steps pertaining to ecological research. So ecological research methods includes observation, experimentation, modeling. It is somehow quite the same with the scientific method. It is not the same as pertaining on the steps, but it is somehow the same with the beginning, because scientific method will always begin on observing. So for observation, as we all know, it is the act of carefully watching something over time. Of course, before we will dealing on the experimentation or on asking the problem or or making a statement of problem, we will be observing first. You will observe first the area of the environment, or even if you're testing not the area but the organism, how the organism will interact to the area or will interact to the habitat. That will be the first thing that you will do. You will observe what will be the happenings day, night, day, lunch, or night, even night. You will be observing it 24 hours on how organism what behave in a certain is in a certain ecology or in a certain area. So observation of population can be done by visual surveys. So there are two survey. We have direct surveys. It is easy to spot species, employ binoculars or scopes. We also have indirect surveys, are used for species that are difficult to track and include looking for the other signs of their presence. So for direct surveys, from the word itself, direct, so meaning to say the species is, you can easily identify the species, you can easily found the species. While indirect surveys, these are those species, or if you are pertaining to the organism, these are those organism that not found, yung parang hindi not found, kundi yung bago lang na species or iilan lang na species. That is indirect surveys. And it mentioned in direct surveys the word binocular. So what do you mean by binocular? Opo. So when we say binocular, is actually a certain instrument that is optical, meaning to say a telescope. One of binocular object is a telescope. It is used for viewing distant objects. So in having an observation, of course, you cannot observe a certain species na malapit ka. Most of the time that you can observe a certain species or certain organism in a certain area kapag malayo ka. Then somehow with that reason, ecologists always use some instrument, and that instrument is binoculars. Okay, and binoculars, or one of the example of binoculars is telescope. Okay, telescope that can view distance object, not only an object but also an organism. Okay, so let's proceed for experiment. So aside after the observation, of course, if the ecologists now already done observing the species, they will conduct now the experiment. So experiment are performed in the lab or in the field. So whether in the field, whether in the area, or whether you will bring the species or you will bring your observation to the laboratory, it's either. So we have types also of experimentation. We have lab experiments. So these are give researchers more control. With the lab experiments are not reflected of the complex interaction in the nature. So meaning to say, your observation is pertaining to in that day lang, in that specific span of time na nandoon ka. Hindi na siya nadadala sa laboratory, nadadala lang with regards to your observation, but the interaction of the nature to the nature and you as an ecologist are not in a laboratory experiment, kasi you will be experimenting your observation inside the laboratory. So comparing, or it is very contrast to the field experiment because it give more accurate picture of natural interaction. So that is the differences between laboratory experiment. So field experiment may not help determine actual cause and effect, but it is more accurate, or it can give more accurate picture of natural interaction. Kasi nandun ka mismo sa loob eh. From your observation papunta, or hindi mo na dadalhin yung experiment mo to laboratory. You will be doing the experiment in the field, in the area. Okay, so the picture, it is more accurate if we compare it to the laboratory experiment. Kasi as I've said a while ago, in laboratory experiment, it is not reflective of the complex interaction in the nature. So, from the observation itself, yun lang. What the span of time that the ecologists observe a certain organism is yun lang ang madadala niya in the laboratory. While if we compare it to the field experiment, you will be spending a lot of time in the area. Maybe along the way, your observation will change. Okay, so that is the differences between lab experiments and field experiments pertaining to the scientific research in ecology. Okay, so computer and mathematical models can be used to describe and model nature. Modeling allows scientists to learn about organism or ecosystem in a ways that would not be possible in a natural or laboratory settings. So as you can see here, we have a picture of an elephant. Ecologists use data transmitted by GPS servers worn by elephants to develop computer models of animals or movements. Or it is actually usually described as a process of an object by use of the mathematical or immatical language. It is a process or an object is presented to pure form. So that's why it's, as you can see in the picture, the ecologists here observing the behavior of an elephant. So the accuracy of the figure of the elephant used by is now transferred to a certain model. Okay, so that there is so-called computer and mathematical models for us to describe a certain organism of a nature, so that we can make a certain model pertaining to that organism. So kaya nga sinabi ko, as I've said a while ago, it is a process or an object is presented in a pure form. So as you can see in the picture, kaya ecologists now use transmitted by GPS receivers worn an elephant to develop a computer models of the animal movements. So ito, pinicture nila. So this one, it is by distance again. Hindi naman pwede na you will actually taking picture na nasa malapitan. There is possibility na tatakbo. There is possibility that there is a changes between the behavior of the animals inside the area or inside the ecology. Okay? So, computer simulation is a natural continuation of mathematical modeling or computer and mathematical models. So, just always remember that if you hear this kind of models, it is particularly on the pure form. What is the purpose of this one is to make an object that is presented in a pure form. Okay? Did you get the point? So, if you have question and clarification, you can leave that in our GC. Okay? So, that was the pertaining to the ecological research. So this was pertaining on the ecological research. So ecological research or scientific research called by the ecology. So let's proceed now to another topic today, which is the changing one factor in an ecosystem can affect many other factors. With that, biodiversity is in need. Okay, biodiversity is the assortment or the variety of living things in an ecosystem. Rainforests have more biodiversity than other locations in the world, but are threatened by human activity. So to explain it further, when we say biodiversity, it is actually a term used to describe the enormous variety of life on Earth. It can be used more specifically to refer all of the species in one region or in an ecosystem. So it actually also refers to every living things, including plants, bacteria, animals, and humans, of course, in a certain area or in a certain ecosystem or ecology. So the question arises here in biodiversity is why it is very important. Of course, the only answer or the only explanation with that is it is essential for the processes that support all life on Earth. So as I've said a while ago, that biodiversity involves living organism or living thing, even plant involved in biodiversity. So meaning to say, it is very important because it is essential for the processes that support all life on Earth, including humans. So without a wide range of animals, plants, even microorganisms, we cannot have the healthy ecosystem. So ecosystem always rely on to provide, or we as a human, or even the living organism like animals, rely to provide us, or rely to ecosystem for us, rely to the ecosystem. Okay, what would be the ecosystem will provide us? Okay, diba? Ecosystem, from the air we breathe, from the food we eat, is in the area, or is in the ecosystem. So that's why living organism or people should value nature by itself. Okay, so always remember that one. Let's go now on discussing biological diversity. So it is actually in the form also of biodiversity, or somehow more explanation on the topic or terms, which is biodiversity. So biodiversity refers to the variety of species. I've already said that one. Variety of species, living organism, even the bacteria or a certain microorganism is presented in the biodiversity. Areas around the world differ in biodiversity. Biodiversity increases as you move toward the equator. Okay, so that explains what is biodiversity is, and I've already mentioned biodiversity, or I've already explained it further. The biodiversity. Okay, so in the statement, biodiversity increases as you move toward the equator. Specifically, it explains that biodiversity is measured of variation at the even in the genetic, species, or in the ecosystem level. Okay, so meaning to say, it increases upon depending on the variation of the genetic and species pertaining to the ecosystem level. Okay, always remember that one. So let's proceed. So stability to an ecosystem. Biodiversity can give also or bring a stability to an ecosystem. Kasi from the word biodiversity, from the differences of the species, from the differences of the species, how does those differences affect one another, and how does the environment affect to the differences of the species. Okay, then let me fix first this. So again, it cannot be fixed. I cannot move the picture, so I'll be reading na lang the statement. So as I've said, biodiversity can bring stability to an ecosystem because it is pertaining on the differences between the organism or living organism in the biodiversity. So it balances everything, because from the differences to the similarities is in similarities in the area, it is includes in biodiversity. A pest could easily destroy all the corn in a farmer's field, but it will be far more difficult for a single type of insect or disease to destroy all individuals of plants species in rainforest. So that is the example of biodiversity. So meaning to say, even there is such a problem like that, it is can easily be stable again by the means of the biodiversity. It helps in a certain area na if there is a involvement of the biodiversity, it can easily balances everything. So let's proceed. So where is biodiversity found? Tropical regions contain 2/3 of all land species on Earth. So the richest environments for biodiversity is all seem to be warm places. So always remember that one, that where can be we found biodiversity in those warm places. What are those? Tropical rainforests, coral reefs, and large tropical lakes. Okay, so let's move. So studying biodiversity, how do ecologists perform experiments related to biodiversity? Researchers catalog the organisms that live in the coral reefs and other attached radio collars to sea turtles. Kasi with this statement, it always involves with the biodiversity when an ecologist study a certain area or a certain environment. Kasi nga sinabi ko, every environment has its own biodiversity. So maybe or not maybe, but in that case, all of the ecologies will always depend on how thus biodiversity is being performed in a certain environment. Kung ano nangyayari, kung ano yung biodiversity dito sa environment na to na pinag-aaralan nila. So it always depends on that. In always going back to going back to the involvement of biodiversity in a certain area or in a certain ecosystem. Okay? So let's proceed. So now let's discuss what is ecosystem. As we all know, population of plants and animals that interact with each other in a given area and with the abiotic components of the area is defined as ecosystem. So it is made up of interacting population, a biological community, and community abiotic factors. So literally, meaning to say that ecosystem is actually an area or a population of a certain organism or a certain species that interact with the environment. Not only with the population of a certain living organism, but also those abiotic factors or those can give or can sustain the food inside the area. Kung sino yung producer of a certain food. So that involves ecosystem. In a certain ecosystem, there is a producer and there is a consumer. There is predator and prey. So it is somehow involved with the interaction between the species to species to their environment. Okay? Let's proceed. So there are two major parts of ecosystem. Sorry. We have terrestrial ecosystem, which is located on land, and aquatic ecosystem found in both fresh and salt water. So these are the two ecosystem, major type of ecosystem. From terrestrial ecosystem to aquatic ecosystem. So from the word itself, by the term, you can eventually understand, you can eventually identify na terrestrial. When we say terrestrial, it is located on land. When we say aquatic, from the word aquatic, it is related into salt water. Okay, these are the two major types of ecosystem. Next, marine ecosystem. So marine ecosystem or the aquatic, pertaining on aquatic ecosystem, it is the saltwater ecosystem that also called as marine ecosystem. So make up approximately 70% of Earth surface. So basically in the Philippines, we have marine ecosystem. Kasi Philippines is surrounds by salt water. Okay? So marine ecosystem is not new to us because it is Philippines or the Philippines itself surrounded by a saltwater ecosystem or saltwater. Okay, that's it. So now let's proceed to another organism in ecosystem. Okay, so a habitat is the place where an organism lives out its life. Habitats can change and even disappear. Habitats can change due to both natural and human causes. Okay, so every organism has a certain ecosystem, or every organism has a certain habitat. Not always, depending on the change of the tropical, or depending on the change of the stability of a certain ecosystem, possible a certain species, like for example a bullfrog, possible in this area they can go, or they can look for another habitat. Possible yan. There's no such thing as a certain species will stay in a certain habitat if that habitat, nangyayari lang yan kung ang habitat na yan ay hindi nagagalaw. Okay, but today's aspect, it is very known that even the snakes, that's why snakes can be found in home, kasi na-occupy na ng human ang mga habitat nila. So that is the disadvantage of having a 3-story building, having a 5-story building, having a certain mall in a certain area, kasi possible that environment is not in a human basis na. That environment is pertaining on the living organism like animals, di ba? So kaya nga sinabi, it can change. Habitat can change depending or due to both natural, if there is so-called succession happening in the environment, or even the human causes, illegal logging, Yan. Um, Building a certain story or a certain malls in a certain area na puro mga animals ang nakatira. So, as a living organism, may utak din yan sila. There is a situation na they will change or they will decided to move to another habitat kasi nawala na yung habitat nila. Okay? So, it is somehow related, it is somehow causes not only by the natural but also on the human causes, or not not some, but um that is the main reason. Kasi on the natural aspect, hindi naman din masyado eh. But on the human causes, napaka talaga. This is the reason why the organism will change. The organism will mix to the habitat of the humans because of this one. Na-occupy na ng humans ang ecosystem ng animals or habitat ng animals. Okay? Let's proceed. So that is how the principle of ecology undergoes from the stability of biodiversity, from the stability of the ecosystem, through the studying of biodiversity, to through the studying on how can environment affects us, because as we all know, we are living in a certain environment, and if there is something going on in the environment, it will affect us. Okay, so today, with the continuation of the topic in the principle, we will be knowing those person or origin or timeline within the field of ecology. So of course, not only microbiology, but all of the field of science has a person or a certain man behind those discoveries, behind those terminologies. So it is actually a what we call study before we know that this field is involved. Ginastudihan pa ito siya. So this ecology or origin of ecology started by Ernest Haeckel. Okay? In 1869, Ernest Haeckel coined the term ecology. It is come from the Greek word oikos, meaning household. Okay? And logos meaning study of. Therefore, the study of nature, household. So from the term itself, the study of nature, household. So meaning to say, it is in the relation of the interaction between the organism to a certain organism and to the environment. What was thus the behavior of the organism shows in a certain environment. So relating this definition to science, ecology becomes the study of the management of the natural environment, which includes the relation of organism with one another and to their surroundings. That's why I'm explaining to you that ecology is not only on the organism, but also on the how thus the organism affects or behave in a certain area or a certain surroundings. Okay, so that is Ernest Haeckel. Next, on the ecology history or a timeline. So during the pre-18th century, from 4th century BCE, ecological thought is said to derive its roots from the early teaching of philosophy, ethics, and politics. So that's involved the person that is very known in the field of science, which is Aristotle and Theophrastus. So this both a person were considered as the one of the first ecologists who had the interest of studying plants and animals. Theophrastus had described several interrelationships that exist between living organism and their environment. If Haeckel is the one coined the study of ecology, Aristotle and Theophrastus is the persons that discover first or give their attention pertaining on the plants and animals. Okay, always remember that one. That this both persons is focused on the plants and animals. How does the animals behave in a certain how does the animals need a certain help with the plants? How does the plants balances all the energy that they need? So that is the focus of the study of Mr. Aristotle and Theophrastus. Okay? Yeah, this picture will actually give you a definite description or physical appearance of the both person. Okay, let's proceed. So in early 18th century, two schools of thought dominated the growing scientific study of ecology. So with this one, I will mention two important schools that give a thought pertaining on the growing scientific study of ecology. Number one is the Arcadian ecology. So the first school that advocates for simple, humble life for man and a harmonious relationship with man and nature. That is Arcadian ecology, or the first school. The second school is imperial ecology. So this is the second school that believe in the establishment of man dominance over nature through the exercise of reason and by hard work. So both school is eventually discovered in early 18th century. So we need to say this both school undergo in a different study pertaining on ecology. So all of the description pertaining to the school is their masterpiece or their specific experiment or discovery. Okay? Pertaining to the field of ecology. Okay, so let's move. So in 1758, Carlos Linnaeus or Carl von Linné, a pioneer that field of taxonomy or the science of naming and classifying organism. So Linnaeus discovered a vast number of plants and animals and recorded them in his book entitled System of Nature. Linnaeus became a huge supporter of imperialism, and because of his immense popularity, the view of imperial ecology became the dominant view within discipline. So Carlos Linnaeus is the person who continued on the classification between the plants and animals. If Aristotle and Theophrastus is the starting or the beginning of the study between the plant and animal, Carlos Linnaeus is or Carlos von Linné is the one who focused on how to classify the differences between plants, with the different species of plants and the different pieces of animals. Okay, so that is the help of Mr. Carlos Linnaeus in the field of ecology. So this was the picture of Mr. Carlos Linnaeus. Okay, so let's move. So during the 19th century, of course, in 1804, Alexander von Humboldt reported an impressive number of species, particularly plants, for which he sought to explain their geographic distribution with respect to geological data. 1 year later, or after, he published his work entitled Idea for Plant Geography. So Alexander von Humboldt was considered as the father of ecology by many scholars. Okay, always remember that one. Always take note that who was the persons behind or the fathers behind the certain field. So for ecology, Alexander von Humboldt is the father of ecology. Okay, so his work or his discoveries was focused on the plants, the geographic distribution of the plants. So in 1859, in these years, Charles Darwin proposed his theory of evolution and adaptation. According to the theory, organisms change over time because of their inherited traits and characters. Charles Darwin's fame can be greatly attributed to his idea of natural selection, or more commonly referred to as a survival of fittest. So, in an ecology, ecosystem, environmental science, Charles Darwin is very known. Why? Because from the selection of the variety of organism or a certain human, it all explained by Charles Darwin by his book Natural Selection. Okay, it define or give the situation or tell us the situation or what is happening in a certain area na pinag-aralan niya. So what was the differences of the behavior of a certain organism in a certain area, and how come humans compare it to the monkey itself, the apes. So Charles Darwin gave a impact on the field of ecology. Okay, move. Charles Darwin published all his observationary proposed mechanism and discoveries in his book entitled On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. So this was Charles Darwin and Mr. Alexander von Humboldt. So that was for Charles Darwin only. So the very good discovery or the big help of Mr. Charles Darwin in the field of ecology is his book, which is Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Okay? So in 1969, Ernest Haeckel again coined the term, ecology. I've already told that one. Edward Seuss first defined the term biosphere from the Greek bios, life, or but by the word sphaira, which is sphere, as the system composed of the living organism and their environment. In 1926, Vladimir E. Vernadsky, in his book entitled The Biosphere, redefined biosphere as a global ecological system integrating all living beings and their relationship, including their interaction with the elements of lithosphere, geosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere. Here is an excerpt from his work. So, from Edward Seuss to Vernadsky, they is actually focused on the biosphere. And Edward is the one to coin the term biosphere, while Vladimir is the one who continued the work of Mr. Edward pertaining of biosphere. He is also the person who know that it is not only biosphere but also there are a lot of sphere that is presented, or there are a lot of elements that is presented pertaining to land, pertaining to water, and even the atmosphere. Okay? So, for 1935, we have Arthur Tansley. He coined the term ecosystem as the biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. Because this, ecology became the science of ecosystem. So literally, it explains that Arthur make, or the one who discover, or the one who explain how the organism is being interact to the another organism, and interacted also to the environment. That's why ecology become the science of ecosystem, because ecosystem is pertaining on the species that interacting to each other with their environment. Okay? So let's proceed. So in 1953, we have Eugene Odom and Howard Odom. So wrote the first ecology textbook, and ecology became university course. So pertaining on the book itself, or pertaining on the how this ecology became a course, yan ang gawa or work ni Eugene Odom and Howard Odom. So in 1970, James Lovelock. So James Lovelock introduced the term Gaia, or the idea that the whole earth is one living entity and will ensure its own survival even if humans destroy themselves. Okay? So this is the work of Mr. James Lovelock. Okay. Next, we have, for 1971, we have, this is not a certain person but a certain organization. You have UNESCO. UNESCO launched the research program Man and Biosphere in the Global of increasing the awareness of humans about their relationship with the nature. Okay, so what do you mean by the abbreviation UNESCO? It is actually from the word United Nation Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. So why does UNESCO is very important? Why? Because it created the idea of World Heritage to protect sites of outstanding universal value. It also pursues scientific cooperation, specifically strengthening ties between nation and society through such projects as early warming system, or even in the or even in the those changes, like for example tsunamis or transboundary water management agreements. So that is the importance of the organization, which is UNESCO. So in 1971, the organization UNESCO launched the research program that Man and Biosphere in the goal of increasing the awareness of humans about their relationship with nature. And that's it. That explains the field of, that explains the proponent or those persons behind the field of ecology. So that was the end of the principle of ecology. By knowing how can we understand the world, how can we understand the environment itself, and who was those person pertaining on the field? Who was those first person who gave the principle of the field ecology? So that is the end of our discussion for this afternoon. I hope you understand. If you have question and clarification, you can leave that in our GC. So have a nice day, everyone.